Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of NYC Crime Spot. We are out here in Marine Park, Brooklyn, in the neighborhood of Marine Park and in the park of Marine Park. Imagine that. The largest park in the great borough of Brooklyn. I hope everybody is having a beautiful weekend. I hope my fellow Americans had a great July 4th. Let's make our way out of this salt marsh over here. I am essentially a mosquito magnet, so I need to get out of here. Or maybe it's my cologne. I don't know. Bugs are everywhere. Let's get out of here. Let's get on to street level, back to civilization. We're going to exit out onto Avenue U here in Marine Park and get to talking about today's little story. Let's get past these morning doves. All right, guys, see you later. Relax. Today's story takes us to the year 1987. And I believe last week's episode, we were also in the year of 1987. That was March 87, I believe. Today's episode takes us into October of 1987. October 8th, to be specific. And we're going to be talking about an incident that takes place right off Avenue U here in Marine Park on the block of East 35th Street. East 35th Street. But what we'll do is we'll exit out here. I'm going to cross over because the sidewalk that's over here is pretty slim. Basically just allows like one person to walk on it. So I'm going to cross over right on Avenue U over here, and we'll get to the other side of the park over here, Marine Park. It's very early on a Sunday morning. A lot of people out though. A lot of people taking advantage of the beautiful weather, coming out, playing soccer, softball, handball, paddleball, some kind of ball. Let me jaywalk over here. You know, jaywalking was technically on the books illegal up until like a year ago. They finally took it off the books. It was rarely enforced, so they were just like, yeah, let's just get rid of this one. We ain't writing tickets for this shit anyway. So there we are, Marine Park. So let's get to the topic of today's episode. And the person that we will be speaking about on today's episode is a person that goes by the name of Otto Hyell, sometimes referred to as John Otto Hyell, who, according to my estimation, was born somewhere around 1939, 1940, something like that. I believe he was 47 years old when he would lose his life, not far from where we are right now, Marine Park, Brooklyn. Now, some of you may know a little bit of the story, you might know some of the background, but we'll try to dig a little deeper and give you guys a little bit more info today. So who exactly was Otto Hyell, or John Otto Hyell? Well, as I said, he was born sometime around 1939, 1940. His name, I believe he is of German descent. Otto Hyell. And he was a neighborhood guy, knock-around guy, mob associate, guy who, as far as I could see, pretty athletic. Guy who's known to play a little racquetball over at the El Caribe, which we will get to. We'll talk about that. Guy who's known to play a little paddleball over here in Marine Park, which we'll also get to. And a guy who I would find out in the 1960s was actually a Golden Gloves boxer representing the CYO. In fact, I would find an old article that would refer to him as a blonde bomber. If anybody has ever seen the unfortunate image of Otto Hyell laying on the pavement, or the mugshot that I'm showing you on this upload here, which is kind of a rare mugshot, you'll see that he does have blonde hair. So very athletic guy, probably a tough guy. I don't think I'd want to go head to head with him, probably kick my ass. But a guy who basically was a criminal dating back to his teen years in the 1950s. Let's take a walk through Marine Park a little bit, give you guys a view over here. Now, I would find evidence of a first arrest of Otto Hyell back in 1956 when he was listed as just being 17 years old. And on the early morning hours of Monday, April 30th, 1956, Otto Hyell and two other cohorts would actually be arrested on top of a one-story grocery store at 6101 Grand Avenue. They would be spotted up there trying to break in, and they would be apprehended. And that would be in the Gaspipe area of Queens. So they were basically attempting to break into this establishment. And as a matter of fact, just 2 hours before that, they had successfully broken into a luncheonette over at Grand Avenue. And at the time, Heidel would be listed as having a residence at 837 Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn. Let's get out of the park. It's pretty noisy over here. He would then be arrested again the following year for receiving stolen goods. The receiving of stolen property, essentially. And as I mentioned, as the 60s went on, it seems like he had gotten involved with the Golden Gloves, representing the CYO. If I had to guess how that came about, I mean, he was probably a tough kid, athletic kid. Maybe an adult got a hold of him and was like, Otto, listen, you're getting in trouble. You know, you seem like a good kid. I think maybe, you know, why don't you try out this boxing thing? And it seemed to be like he was tough, like I said. I mean, I couldn't find any evidence of him winning like a championship or whatever it is, but he seemed to be going down a good path, but didn't last too long. Didn't last too long. And basically by the 1970s, he was a full-fledged master thief, known by authorities as an electronics expert who had had a job, at least at one point, with a phone company, thus being why he was good with electronics and, you know, dipping into power lines for his, we'll get into that too, for his criminal feats. Now in 1972, at the age of 33 years old, John Otto Hyell would be nabbed with 4 other individuals after a raid of a warehouse at 1956 and 1958 Flushing Avenue in Ridgewood. Now this raid resulted in a tip from an informant, and during this raid they would recover as much as $150,000 worth of goods stolen from a company by the name of Air Freight Warehouse Corp. Now this was a company that was dealing with shipments coming, you know, in and out of JFK Airport essentially. And Otto Hyell and his crew managed to get into this warehouse, steal a bunch of crap, and yeah, they would ultimately be arrested for this. Now after that, if we were to fast forward to 1976, Otto Hyell would be arrested once more. He was a part of a team of guys who had stolen over $400,000 worth of jewelry from a Manhattan jewelry firm known as Charles Friedman and Sons. He would be nabbed for this in October of '76 after pulling off that job earlier in the year in March. So another arrest for Mr. Otto Hyell, and he was basically still dealing with the other case of the warehouse that they raided. And here we go again, arrested once more. Now, it would be at some point in Otto Heidel's life that he would get the chance to become an FBI informant, a CI, let's say, working for the feds, handing them info. Now, I can't say exactly when that happened, but I would imagine it would be sometime around this time in the late 70s. Somewhere around that time, John Otto Hyell decides that he is going to be working with the authorities, getting away with being a part of these jobs, probably making good money, and, you know, informing for immunity, being a little side rat, so to speak. Look at this tree, wow. Look at this, completely taken over by these leaves. Pretty cool. Wow. Well, this is what we do here, folks. If we're walking around the neighborhood, we talk about the neighborhood, we talk about what we see. You know, this is an all-encompassing channel, in case you haven't noticed. But anyway, as the 1980s came about, Otto Heidel's robbery prospects would increase significantly as he would become a member of what law enforcement referred to as the Bypass Gang, a largely Lucchese crime family and Colombo crime family affiliated crew of men who basically were infamous safe cracking, bank heisting, jewelry taking, store robbing bandits who were very good at what they did. One of their more prominent safe crackers was a master locksmith and safe cracker by the name of Dominic Costa, a man who was not a mobster or some kind of criminal type guy, but a man who was recruited by these individuals. Apparently, according to law enforcement, his sister was with a Colombo guy, and something happened where he had ended up getting recruited by the Bypass Gang to do these jobs. And one thing that he would say that they would do is he wouldn't know when these jobs were going to happen, and basically they would call him up, blah, 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 we got a job. They would come to his house, they would blindfold him, and they would take him to the job. Dominic Costa. We'll get to more on him later on. Now, some other prominent people involved in this Bypass Gang. Well, we have Georgie Neck Zappola, a man who seemingly in 2025 is still going at it, still involved in that life. Along with him, we have Vincent Zappola, Anthony Zappola, Carmine Sessa, Frank Smith, Sal Fusco Jr., Michael Bloom, and many others. They would pull off numerous jobs throughout this time in the New York and Long Island area. And, you know, a lot of what they were doing was really puzzling authorities, because they knew that they were dealing with at least, an element of these guys who were masters at what they did. Genius with figuring out how to open safes, figuring out how to trick alarm systems. And one of the things that they would do while they were doing these jobs is they would actually take the safe doors with them on these jobs in order to avoid authorities, I guess you could say, maybe reverse engineering what they were doing. So if authorities had the safe door, they would realize, like, oh, all right, this is how this guy did this is how they're getting in, blah, blah, blah. But by taking the safe doors, they kind of left that, prospect open for debate as far as authorities were concerned. So, puzzling authorities, and like I said, they were doing this shit out in New York City, they were doing this shit out in Long Island, all around the city. Now, as far as Otto Hyell was concerned, well, what was his job within this whole thing? As I mentioned, he was an electronics expert. So what he would do, according to authorities, he would use something called a bypass box in order to bypass the alarm systems. Now, I would listen to how this was done by authorities. Apparently, some of these banks, their alarm system, they had some kind of device outside on like the power lines that would send some sort of signal inside that would, say that the alarm is either going off or not going off, or the safe has been breached or not breached. And due to Otto Hyell's use of this bypass box and him being an electronics expert, he was able to trick the signal to make it seem like everything was all right. And if an alarm did go off in one of these situations, well, the guys essentially would back off, leave, cops would come, be like, I don't know, must be a fluke, nothing's going on here. They would leave and the guys would go back to work. And as I said, during this Lucchese Colombo venture, it would be just millions of dollars taken in safety deposit boxes, jewelry, cash, just so much money, an incredibly lucrative operation. Now, what would happen sometime in 1987, according to Burton Kaplan, who was Anthony Casso's guy, a lifelong criminal, a guy responsible for helping set up the alliance of Stephen Caracappa and Louis Eppolito, the mob cops, kind of the go-between, setting up numerous deaths, numerous other jobs having to do with the Lucchese crime family. Of course, you guys know the mob cops. I mean, I've talked about this ad nauseum. I'm a bit obsessed with the case. Well, Burton Kaplan would claim that Otto Hyell would be outed in 1987 as being this informant. During his court testimony, he would actually tell us how this whole thing started to be realized. And it started to be realized when a man you all know, an infamous banana killer by the name of Tommy Karate Patera, strolled into the El Caribe, was hanging around with Burton Kaplan. Otto Hyell had just finished up playing some racquetball. He would approach these two individuals, and rather than me tell you exactly how this incident went down, I think what would be better is if I read directly from Burton Kaplan's testimony.
Did there come a time, sir, that you went to the El Caribe and overheard or observed a conversation between Otto Hyell and another person named Tommy Karate? Yes. Tommy is a made member of the Banana crime family. What was the sum and substance of the conversation between Otto Hyell and Tommy Karate? I had went to the El Caribe that day to the beach club to see my tenants who had the luncheon concession there. And we were talking, and Tommy Karate was standing with us. Otto Hyell walked over, and he was playing racquetball in the facilities. Tommy Karate said to him, "You know something, Otto? I think you're a stool pigeon." Otto Hyell was very affronted by it. He said, "Why are you talking to me like that, Tommy?" And Tommy says, "It just seems that every time we do something when you're involved, somebody gets pinched, or they know we're coming in before we get there, and nothing ever goes right. I personally think you're a stool pigeon." What else was Otto's reaction besides denying it? To me, he looked like he was a little afraid. Tommy Karate was the type of guy that was very, very capable. Had you been involved in a watch deal or Bulliver watch deal? Yes. Can you tell the jury? Was that related somehow to Otto Hyell? What had happened just before that? Casso told me that this gang had broken into Bulliver's warehouse in Queens, and that if I wanted, he can get me some of the watches to fence. It was a fairly reasonable price, so I said okay. I would do it. And he said, don't worry about the money. I'll vouch for the money. And we were delivered a truckload of Bulliver watches, and Otto Hyell was one of the people who delivered it to Tommy in Staten Island. We had a house we used to drop there, and Tommy said that there was 3 or 4 guys on the truck. And when Tommy came back and told me that, I said to Tommy, let's do ourselves a favor and load that stuff up and take it to a different spot. The next day, law enforcement went to that first spot and were looking for the Bulliver watches, but they weren't there. People that were involved in the Bulliver watches were arrested. After hearing that conversation between Mr. Karate and Mr. Heidel, did you inform Casso about it? I told him exactly what happened, the exchanges between the two of them, and I said, I know you're close to this Otto Hyell. And he says, yeah, we've been friends and doing things for years. We never had a problem with him. I said, to me, it didn't look right. This whole conversation. He said, well, why don't we ask our friends to find out what they could do about Otto? They came back, and Louis told me that Otto Hyell was hot. That means he was cooperating. What did Casso say to you? What he normally says. Are you sure? I know this guy a long time. Do you think these guys are accurate? I don't know, I said. They haven't told us anything that wasn't accurate. He said, okay. I'll take care of it.
So after this incident over at the El Caribe, when Tommy Karate labels Heidel a rat, Kaplan tells Casso what he heard. Casso says, well, why don't you reach out to the crystal ball? Reach out to those 2 crooked detectives and see what they could find out. Kaplan would reach out to those detectives. Louis Eppolito would report back and say, yep, we got ourselves a canary, Mr. Kaplan. He is no good. It is cleanup time. Anthony Gaspipe Casso would later say that he would instruct Georgie Nexapola to sit on Heidel and make sure that he wouldn't be breathing for long. On October 8th of 1987, Otto Hyell would come out over here to Marine Park, right where I am right now, wearing a gray sweatshirt and blue jogging pants. He'd play some paddleball. Right over here. At these courts you're looking at right now. Now Otto Hyell would leave the park a little after 4 p.m. and make his way out here to Avenue U, hoping to hop in his 1979 blue Pontiac and be on his way. Little did he know that when he would reach his Pontiac over here in Avenue U, his tire would be popped. Otto Hyell would retrieve the tools necessary to fix his tire right here on Avenue U, and he would place a .38 down on the concrete beside him. Now, I don't know if this was usual practice for Heidel. I don't know if he was always walking around packing, or maybe he was paranoid about the incident that just happened at the El Caribe. Nonetheless, I'll get a view of this street right here because this is about where he was parked. But nonetheless, he was packing. And as he's kneeling down to fix his flat tire right over here on Avenue U, according to authorities, 2 men would pull up in a light blue 1983 Oldsmobile, and they would start firing away at Heidel right over here. Now, after being hit right here on Avenue U, Otto Hyell would get up and start running. He would run over here to East 35th Street, where I'm racing to now. Oldsmobile trailing behind him, knowing that this is a one-way, but hey, screw it. What are we worried about one-ways for when we're trying to take somebody out? Heidel would turn down this block here and make a run for it. And when he would get to right about here, he would be ended right here on East 35th Street, falling to the pavement and taking his last breaths. Right where I kneel now. Mr. Otto Hyell, the master electronics expert who had been a criminal since the 1950s, would lose his life. Now I'll put the image of the crime scene here, where Mr. Heidel ended up getting outlined in chalk. Now, I'm not just saying that as a figure of speech. Literally, he was outlined in chalk. If you look close, you'll see it. Right here in East 35th Street. And this tree was there at the time, too. You'll see this tree right there to the left in the photo. There is also a photo of what Heidel looked like laying on this pavement. I cannot show you this, but one quick Google search will produce that image for you. Now these two men in the Oldsmobile would continue down this way, down the one way, probably speeding so fast to get the hell out of here. We'll get one more look down this block and then we'll continue on, close out this story. Beautiful Marine Park, Brooklyn. Now, after this incident, we would later find out in the early 2000s when Burton Kaplan would become a federal witness against Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, the mafia cops. We would later find out that Louis Ippolito, as a part of the investigation into this death of John Otto Hyell, which occurred here on East 35th Street, he would actually go to Heidel's house over at 2151 East 70th Street during the investigation, and he would confiscate tapes from this apartment. Now, he would give these tapes to Burton Kaplan, who would then give these tapes to Anthony Casso to listen to. And what do you know it? He was, in fact, recording conversations. One conversation in particularly that Casso would hear would be a conversation between Heidel and actually Vicamuso. That was one conversation that Casso had the privilege of listening to amongst other ones. So he knew he, in his mind, did the right thing. And we know now today that Heidel was, in fact, an informant. I mean, this has been, proven through, the evidence of those tapes, but also admitted by authorities later on as well. And as I mentioned, according to Casso, it would be Sal Fusco Jr. and Vinny Zappola that would actually be here that day who pulled off this job. Now, I mentioned Dominic Costa earlier. I mean, we can get into him now a little bit, the man who was recruited as the master genius safecracker, the man who worked for this gang. Now, the following year, actually just about a year later, in October of 1988, he would be hit 5 times in an attempted rub out outside his home in Bay Ridge, because at that time he had become a informant. He was working with authorities and admitting to what he was doing with the Bypass Gang. Once again, how did they find that out? Well, the crystal ball. Stephen Caracappa, Louis Ippolito would inform Kaplan, who would inform Casso of Dominic Costa working with authorities. And as I said, in October of '88, he would cheat death outside his home in Bay Ridge. He would survive. Unfortunately for Mr. Costa, he would be permanently disfigured. Now, as the early 90s came, of course, many of you know, a lot of these characters in the mob in general started being taken down. A lot of this family started getting decimated. A lot of people started being sentenced. Ultimately, Casso and Amuso, boss, underboss, will become fugitives, as well as Georgie Neck Zappola. But in November of 1990, 14 men would be indicted by authorities as a part of the Bypass Gang. That would essentially be the end of the Bypass Gang. It would be the end of a lot of individuals' criminal careers. Of course, Amuso still sits in prison today, and their exploits, you know, many of them reach far outside the bounds of what we are calling the Bypass Gang, what authorities called the Bypass Gang. Lots of deaths, lots of lucrative businesses, illicit businesses. Now, as a side note to the Dominic Costa situation, ultimately they would convict 2 individuals who they believe to be a part of the attempted rub out of Dominic Costa. Those individuals were Sal Fusco Jr. and Michael Bloom, who were members of the Bypass Gang. Now, later on, those convictions would actually get thrown out. It would come to be found that actually it was Carmine Sessa and others who were involved in that. Some of you know that Carmine Sessa himself would become an informant. So their convictions would actually get thrown out. Wouldn't necessarily end their criminal careers, but they would not be on the hook for the Dominic Costa attempted rub out. So, in closing, you know, I hope everybody enjoyed this walk and talk throughout Marine Park, Brooklyn, through the Park of Marine Park, the largest park in Brooklyn, and through the neighborhood of Marine Park. It's a beautiful day out today. I'm glad I got to take you guys on a little walk through Brooklyn, talk about a criminal event, talk about some history, take you to a spot where an event occurred in October of '87, an event that led to the untimely death of a lifelong criminal, electronics expert, and a man who never missed an opportunity to rip off a business in order to make a buck, but a man who unfortunately decided to become an informant, not knowing that one of the men he was working for, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, had 2 moles inside the NYPD who were able to confirm the suspicions of one Tommy Karate Patera. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a like. leave a comment. If you think you know somebody that would enjoy content such as this, well, do me a favor. Send them over. Tell them to check out the content. Plenty of videos on my channel. I'm sure they can get lost in the sauce for a little while checking the stuff out. And with that, everybody, have a beautiful week ahead. And I will see you all very soon.